Tonight we leave behind the world of screens and LEDs, of cold glass and whispering electronics. Instead, you step, barefoot, onto a sun-warmed flagstone floor. The air is thick, not with humidity, but with a dry, dusty heat that carries a symphony of smells. There's the earthy, sweet dust scent of dried reeds. The sharp, tannic bite of a strange black liquid. The sour tang of animal glue simmering in a pot. And beneath it all, something richer, fruitier, almost peppery. It's a smell that feels ancient and healthy all at once, like the very soul of this sun-baked landscape. You are in a Greek scriptorium, a workshop for making books, in the 4th century BCE, and the first thing you learn is that creating knowledge is not a quiet, clean affair. It is a visceral, messy, and oddly fragrant craft. Forget the silent, sterile libraries of today. Here, you will get ink-stained, your fingers will stick together with sap, and the aroma of the finished product is less new book smell and more artisanal Athenian kitchen. Honestly, given the tools, the materials, and the general lack of health and safety protocols, you probably won't survive a full week as a scribe, let alone make a coherent scroll. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The light that cuts through the high window is a solid, golden bar, illuminating a universe of dancing motes. You listen. The soundtrack is not of whispered philosophies, but of practical, grinding industry. A rhythmic scratch-scratch comes from the corner where a man painstakingly shaves the knots from a length of papyrus stalk with a bronze blade. From another corner, a low, steady thump-thump-thump echoes, the sound of a heavy stone roller being pushed back and forth over a damp mat of fibers. Someone nearby is grinding something in a mortar with a pestle, a slow, gritty crunch. Your eyes adjust. This isn't a temple to the muses. It's a factory. The end product is literature, history, and lore, but the process is pure, unglamorous manufacturing. You walk further in, the flagstones cool and uneven under your feet. A young apprentice, face smudged with soot, rushes past you clutching a pottery jug that sloshes with a dark liquid. He gives you a hurried nod. You're not a visitor, you're expected labor. The master of the scriptorium, a man named Philon with forearms like twisted olive wood and a permanently ink-stained brow, gestures you over to a long, stained work table. You'll start with the foundation, he says, his voice a dry rasp. The biblos. He points to a bundle of coarse, triangular stalks leaning against the wall. They look like oversized, pale green drinking straws. This is papyrus, the paper of the ancient world, and it did not grow on the hills of Greece. It was a costly import, shipped in great bales from the marshy deltas of the Nile. Every single sheet represented a significant investment, which is why nothing, not a single fiber, could be wasted. The very word for book, biblos, comes from the Greek name for the Phoenician city of Byblos, a major port for papyrus trade, a fact you quietly turn over in your mind as you heft the surprisingly light stalks. Philon shows you the first, crucial step. He takes a stalk and with a sharp knife, slices it lengthwise, peeling away the tough green rind to reveal a pale, pithy core. The heart, he says. This is what we want. He hands you a knife and a stalk. Your first attempt is clumsy, the blade slipping and gouging too deep. He corrects your grip. Like skinning a fish. Long, steady pulls. Soon, you have a pile of these pithy strips, each about as wide as 2 fingers. They feel spongy and damp, like a vegetable you shouldn't eat. Next to you, another worker is laying these strips side by side, vertically, on a wooden soaking board, their edges just touching. Over this first layer, he lays another set of strips, but this time horizontally, creating a crude, loose-woven mat. This cross-hatching is the secret to papyrus's strength. The natural gums in the plant will bind the perpendicular fibers into a single, coherent sheet. But as you watch, Phelan does something unexpected. From a small, elegant ceramic arybellos, a flask with a narrow neck, he pours a thin, glistening stream of pale yellow liquid into a shallow dish. The scent hits you immediately: fruity, grassy, vivid. Olive oil. The finest kind, pressed from green olives. He doesn't drink it. Instead, he dips a clean linen rag into it and, with a practiced hand, begins to lightly wipe it over the surface of the newly arranged papyrus mat before it goes for pressing. "It helps the layers speak to each other," he murmurs, seeing your curious look. "And it keeps the future from eating the past." It's a cryptic statement, but for now, you simply note the action. The very first touch on the path to creating a scroll is not ink, not text, but the humble, ubiquitous oil of the olive. The papyrus mat you helped prepare, now lightly kissed with oil, is not yet paper. It is a damp, fragile lattice, a promise of a writing surface. Phelan directs you and another worker to carefully lift the wooden soaking board, water dripping from its edges, and carry it to the heart of the pressing operation. This isn't a giant, complicated machine. The technology is elegantly, brutally simple. In the center of the room sits a massive, worn slab of marble, its surface smoothed into a gentle concavity by generations of use. Beside it lies a heavy stone cylinder, wider than your outstretched arms, with smooth, worn wooden handles pegged into each end. It looks less like a tool for crafting literature and more like something you'd use to flatten a road. "The trick," Phelan says, placing his hands on one of the roller's handles, "is in the weight and the rhythm. Too fast, and you tear the fibers. Too slow, and the gums set before they've married." He nods for you to take the opposite handle. The stone is cool and gritty. Together, you heave, and the roller moves with a dense, gravitational inertia. You guide it onto one end of the papyrus mat, which has been transferred directly onto the marble slab. At first, there's a squelching protest as water is forcibly expelled, streaming down the channels of the marble into a waiting clay drain. The sound is satisfyingly wet. You push, your muscles straining against the sheer mass of the stone. Back and forth, you and Phelan find a slow, crushing rhythm. Thump, drag, thump, drag. As you work, the transformation begins. The loose, spongy mat compresses. The separate vertical and horizontal strips begin to vanish, merging into a single, coherent plane. The cloudy water being pressed out carries the pale green residue of plant matter. And you notice something else. Before the final pressing, Phelan again reaches for his arybellos of oil. But this time, he doesn't use a rag. He pours a few drops of the oil directly onto the marble slab and spreads it with his palm in a thin, almost invisible film. "For the stone," he grunts, as you both reposition the roller. So the biblos does not decide to become part of the mountain. It's a practical, brilliant bit of ancient non-stick technology. The oil creates a microscopic barrier, ensuring the nascent papyrus sheet releases cleanly from the stone after its compression, preventing a costly, heartbreaking tear. Historians still argue whether this slab oiling was a universal practice or a luxury of the best-funded scriptoria. But here, in this workshop, it is an unspoken ritual. The pressing continues. The papyrus sheet is now visibly changing. It's becoming thinner, more uniform. The wet, matte surface begins to take on a subtle sheen where the light catches it. After what feels like an age of labor, Phelan signals a halt. With a flat, polished piece of cedar wood, he carefully lifts one edge of the now consolidated sheet. It holds. It is a single entity. He peels it back from the oiled marble with a soft, sucking sound and lays it on a raised drying rack made of stretched linen. The sheet is a pale, creamy color, its texture still rough, like a thick, handmade paper. But it is recognizably papyrus. The smell here at the pressing station is a complex layering: the vegetal, cucumber-like scent of crushed papyrus pith, the mineral smell of wet marble, and that ever-present, grounding note of peppery olive oil, now subtly baked into the stone itself from years of such applications. Your hands are sore, your tunic damp with sweat and splashed water. Phelan hands you a coarse sponge and a bucket of clean water. "The slab," he says. You wash away the residual plant pulp and water, then take a clean, dry rag to wipe it down. As you do, you feel the faint, slick trace of the oil you'd watched him apply. It doesn't come off. It has been absorbed into the stone's porous surface, part of its patina. This slab isn't just a tool, it is a seasoned instrument, its relationship with the papyrus mediated by this thin, fragrant film. You realize this is the second encounter between your future scroll and olive oil. The first was a preventative whisper on the raw fibers. This was a forceful, defining embrace, a shaping under immense pressure, aided by a slick of oil to ensure a clean separation. The scroll is being born, and at every traumatic, formative moment, olive oil is there, a midwife ensuring the process doesn't end in ruin. The new sheet will need days to dry fully in the shaded, airy part of the workshop. But already, other sheets, pressed earlier, are ready for the next, finer stage of finishing. An older worker sits at a low table, a pile of smooth, rounded seashells and a lump of pumice stone at his elbow. He takes a dry sheet and begins to rub it vigorously with the inside of a cowrie shell. The sound is a soft, persistent swish swish swish. This laborious process, called polishing, smooths the rough surface, closing the pores of the papyrus, preparing it to receive ink without bleeding. It's here you learn a lesser-known detail. The very best papyrus, reserved for royal decrees or epic poems, sometimes received a final, infinitesimal rub with an oiled cloth after polishing. Not enough to make it greasy, but just enough to impart a final, protective luster and to ensure the surface was perfectly uniform. It was the bibliographic equivalent of a final buff on a suit of armor before battle. The scent, momentarily subdued during the drying, would reawaken at this touch, a faint, fresh reminder of the fruit of the Athenian earth, now an inseparable part of the Egyptian reed. With a dried, polished sheet of papyrus now lying before you like a pale desert plain, the focus shifts from foundation to mark-making. The blankness is an invitation, but it is also a threat. A single mistake here cannot be backspaced or deleted. The tool for this perilous act is the kalamos, a humble reed pen, but the soul of it is the ink. Phelan leads you to a quieter corner of the scriptorium, where the air is hazy with a different kind of dust. Here, the dominant smell is acrid, smoky, like a cold fireplace. Several pottery lamps, their wicks glowing, sit under inverted ceramic cones, their tops blackened with a velvety, sooty deposit. "The black," Phelan says, tapping one of the cones. "The breath of fire, captured." This is lampblack, the primary pigment for the most common ink, melon, the Greek word for black. It's a substance you create by impoverishing a flame of its light, collecting its pure, carbon essence. You help scrape the soot from the cones into a wide, shallow mortar. It is shockingly light and fine, a powder that threatens to float away with your every breath. To this, Phelan adds a lump of hard, translucent tree gum, probably from the acacia. "The binder," he explains. "It makes the soot remember where we put it." You begin to grind with the pestle. The gum resists, then slowly, under pressure and the heat from friction, it softens and blends with the soot, creating a thick, tarry paste. It looks nothing like ink. It looks like a mistake. Now comes the liquid. From a large amphora, Phelan pours water into a small, finely painted kylix, a drinking cup repurposed for craft. He adds it drop by drop to the paste as you grind, the mixture slowly transforming from a stiff paste to a thick, glossy sludge. But water alone isn't enough. Philan picks up a familiar vessel, the arybellos of olive oil. He uncorks it and, with a practiced eye, lets a single, slender thread of golden oil fall into the mortar. The negotiator, he says. This is the critical, surprising ingredient. The oil performs a delicate dance of chemistry and physics. Water and the gum-based binder can make an ink, but on the absorbent, fibrous surface of papyrus, such an ink would feather and bleed, spreading along the tiny channels in the plant material like a dark stain, rendering the precise, elegant Greek script a blurry mess. The olive oil, in its tiny quantity, changes everything. It acts as a surfactant and a control agent. It helps the gum bind more evenly with the lampblack particles, creating a more stable suspension. More importantly, when the inked reed touches the papyrus, the oil momentarily resists the papyrus's natural absorbency. It gives the scribe a fraction of a second of working time, allowing the carbon particles to settle on the surface of the papyrus rather than being instantly sucked into its thirsty depths. The result is a sharp, crisp line. The oil is what allows the thought to be pinned to the page with clarity, not swallowed by it. It's a universally accepted fact of ancient ink making, a recipe corroborated by later Roman writers like Vitruvius. Without that drop of oil, philosophy would have been a smudgy, frustrating business. You continue to grind, the paste now becoming a deep, luminous black liquid with the consistency of heavy cream. Philan dips the tip of a calamus into it, then draws a quick, testing line on a scrap of papyrus. The line is perfect, jet black, with clean, defined edges. He hands you the reed. You try. Your first line is a wobbly, blobby mess. The oil gives you control, but it doesn't grant skill. As you practice, you become aware of the ink's scent. It's a loud aroma, the deep, primal smell of smoke from the lampblack, the faint, resinous pine note from the gum, and underneath it, the subtle, fruity whisper of the olive oil. It's not a strong smell, but it's there in the pot, and it will be there on every line of text that comes from this workshop. Every Aristotelian treatise, every fragment of Sappho, every bureaucratic inventory in this city will carry, within its very substance, this trace of the orchard. But not all ink is black. 4 headings, 4 illuminated initials, for the rich purple symbolizing royalty, other inks are needed. Philan shows you a small, precious cache of other materials. Ground malachite for green, ochre for red, and the most expensive of all, a tiny shell containing flakes of true purple, derived from the mucus of the murex sea snail. For these pigments, the binder is different, often egg white or honey. But the final step, the one to ensure flow and prevent caking on the pen, frequently involved, again, a minuscule addition of oil. It was the ancient equivalent of a flow improver in modern paints. Historians still argue whether the oil was strictly necessary for these pigment inks or if it was a habitual carryover from the black ink process, a this has always worked kind of tradition. But in this scriptorium, the arybellos moves from mortar to mortar, its slender neck dispensing its golden mediator into every hue. The air in this corner becomes a library of smells in itself. The smokiness of black, the mineral tang of green, the seaweed funk of purple, all subtly united by that common, fruity base note. You are not just preparing colors. You are blending the very atmosphere that will, one day, hang in the scroll-lined halls of a library. The ink is ready, a pot of captured night. The papyrus sheet is ready, a field of potential. But you cannot write on a loose, flapping rectangle. The papyrus must become a scroll, and that requires structure, a spine, a sense of ordered progression. Philan directs you to a bench where the dried sheets await their final assembly. The process is called collation, and it is where the written work takes its physical form. First, you take your single, beautifully pressed sheet. It is strong, but it is not large enough for a lengthy text. So, you join it to another. The join is a moment of vulnerability, a seam that must be made invisible to both the eye and the stress of repeated rolling and unrolling. You lay the edge of one sheet precisely over the edge of another, overlapping them by no more than the width of 2 fingers. The join must be perfect, the fibers aligned, or the scroll will have a weak point that will crack and fail. Now, for the adhesive. This isn't the gum used in ink. This is a stronger, more flexible glue, and its preparation is its own olfactory event. In a small bronze pot over a low brazier, a sticky, amber-colored substance bubbles slowly. It smells profoundly organic, like a cross between a carpenter's shop and a barnyard. This is collar, animal glue, made by boiling down the connective tissues, hides, and bones of cattle or rabbits for hours until only a thick, tenacious gelatin remains. It is the duct tape of the ancient world. You apply a thin, even layer of this warm glue to the overlapping seam with a flat brush made of frayed reed. Then, with immense care, you press the 2 sheets together, smoothing from the center outward to eliminate bubbles. The bond sets quickly. But Phelan doesn't stop there. Once the glue has set to a tacky state, he takes a tool you've seen before but used differently, the smooth stone roller. This one is smaller, a hand roller made of polished basalt. And before he applies it, he does that familiar, almost ceremonial thing. He dips his fingertips into a dish of olive oil and runs them lightly over the roller's surface. Then, with firm, even pressure, he rolls it directly over the glued seam. The purpose is twofold, and it's a brilliantly practical bit of ancient engineering. First, the oiled roller ensures the stone doesn't stick to the fresh, still damp glue, a disaster that would tear the delicate papyrus. Second, and more subtly, the infinitesimal transfer of oil onto the surface of the seam acts as a sealant and a flex agent. It protects the glue line from absorbing too much ambient humidity, which could make it gummy, or from drying out and becoming brittle. It gives the joint a slight plasticity. This is crucial, because this seam will spend its life being flexed, rolled tightly around a wooden rod, then unfurled for reading, then rolled again. The oil helps the glue remember to bend, not break. It's a detail rarely highlighted in grand histories of literature, but it's the kind of workshop wisdom that kept the Iliad from literally falling apart at a crucial hexameter. You repeat this process, sheet by glued sheet, until you have a long, continuous strip of papyrus that can stretch the length of the workshop, a scroll in its raw, blank form. The smell now is a potent mix: the pungent, primal scent of the animal glue, the dry grass smell of the papyrus, and the clean, high note of the olive oil from the roller. It's not a perfume you choose, but it is the smell of something being made durable, of fragments being forged into a whole. Now comes the final, framing touch. At the beginning and end of this long papyrus strip, you attach the umbilicus, the wooden rod around which the scroll will be wound. These are not crude sticks. They are carefully turned from cedar or cypress, sanded smooth, and often tipped with decorative knobs of bone or bronze. But a bare wood rod rubbing against the inner layer of papyrus for years would cause friction, wear, and tears. So, you take a rag, dip it in, you guessed it, olive oil, and give each rod a thorough, penetrating rub. You work the oil into the grain of the wood. This does several things. It conditions the wood, preventing it from drying out and splintering. It creates a slightly slick surface that allows the first layer of papyrus to roll and unroll with minimal resistance. And perhaps most importantly for our story, it imparts a scent. The cedar wood itself has a pleasant, sharp aroma, but now it carries the deeper, fruitier note of the oil. This scented rod will be at the core of the finished scroll, its fragrance slowly, over decades, migrating into the innermost layers of the papyrus wound tightly around it. The core of the knowledge object is, quite literally, anointed. You attach the first sheet to its rod with a final dab of glue, reinforced by a narrow strip of linen tape. You give the rod an experimental turn. The papyrus begins to wind around it, smoothly, evenly. The scroll is born. It is a physical object now, a cylinder of potential text. And as you hold it, you realize it already has a personality, a signature beyond the visual. It smells of the workshop, yes, of glue and plant fiber and stone. But woven through it all, from the first oiled preparation of the raw sheet to the final conditioning of its wooden spine, is the persistent, reassuring scent of the olive. It is not the smell of food here. It is the smell of craft, of preservation, of a conscious effort to make something fragile endure the relentless press of time. The scroll is finished in your hands, a compact cylinder of blank potential. But it is not meant for the workshop bench. Its destiny is the library. Phelan nods, a silent command to follow. You leave the clatter and earthy smells of the scriptorium behind, passing through a heavy, leather-curtained doorway. The change is immediate and profound. The sound drops away, replaced by a dense, respectful silence broken only by the soft shuffle of sandals and the occasional, delicate shush of a scroll being unfurled. The light changes, too. The harsh, defining bars of workshop sun are gone, softened by high, narrow windows fitted with panels of thinly scraped selenite, a translucent stone that diffuses the glare into a gentle, milky glow. This is the library proper. And the smell hits you first. It's not a single scent, but a loud atmosphere, a perfume composed of time and purpose. The dry, papery scent of thousands of papyrus scrolls is the base note, a vast, quiet exhalation of aged plant matter. There's the faint, sweet tang of cedarwood from the endless rows of shelves and the scroll rods within. There's the cool, mineral smell of the stone floors and walls. But rising above it all, integrating it, is that now familiar fragrance, olive oil. Here, it is no longer the sharp, fresh note from the arabellos. It has matured, deepened. It is the smell of oil that has soaked into wood, that has gently oxidized on the surface of treated leather, that has been warmed by lamplight and human breath for decades. It smells clean, slightly waxy, and profoundly calm. This is the library's true signature. You are not just smelling a preservative, you are breathing the air of curated thought. You walk slowly down a central aisle. The scrolls are not piled haphazardly. They are housed in rectangular niches called nidhi, nests, each shelf labeled with a small hanging tag of fired clay, incised with the author's name and the work's title. Some of the more valuable scrolls reside in cylindrical leather cases called capsi, which stand like sentinels on the shelves. You run a finger along the edge of a shelf. It is not dusty. It feels smooth, with a slight, satiny resistance. You bring your finger to your nose. There it is again, the subtle, polished scent of oil. The shelves themselves, likely of cypress or oak, have been treated with it to prevent warping in the dry air and to deter wood-boring insects. The practice of oiling library furniture is widely attested, a logical extension of woodworking knowledge into the realm of archive maintenance. A librarian, a bibliophilax, moves past you with the silent grace of a heron. He is an older man, his robe simple but clean, his hands pale from a life spent indoors with texts, not under the sun. He carries a small, soft linen bag. He stops at a shelf, retrieves a scroll from its nidus, and unrolls the first few columns with a tender, precise motion. He is not reading the text. He is reading the scroll. His eyes scan the papyrus surface, his fingers gently testing the edges of the sheets near the glue lines. He is checking for dryness, for brittleness, for the first signs of foxing or mold. From his bag, he produces a small, clean pad of wool, lightly dampened with, of course, olive oil. With a touch so faint it seems more like a blessing than a chore, he glides the pad along the outer edge of the scroll, the part most exposed to handling and air. It's not an application of oil to make it wet, but a transfer of the faintest protective sheen, a molecular top-up to replenish what time and air have stolen. Historians still argue whether this was a daily ritual for all scrolls or a periodic treatment for those showing signs of wear, but the evidence from texts describing library care is clear. Oil was the library's primary balm. You watch him work, and you understand. The smell in this room isn't an accident, a byproduct of the scrolls manufactured drifting in from the workshop. It is a maintained environment, a deliberately cultivated atmosphere. The oil here serves a dual purpose that goes beyond simple craft. On a physical level, it is a barrier, a moisturizer, a flexible shield against the elements. On a sensory level, it creates a specific psychological space. The smell is familiar, domestic, associated with cleanliness. Oil was used in bathing, with health, with the lamp that wards off the dark. It would unconsciously signal to a scholar that this is a place of safety, of care, of civilized order. In a world of often pungent and unpleasant urban smells, the library's clean, woody, oil-infused air would have felt like a sanctuary for the mind. You take a deep breath. This is what you came to understand. This is the smell of ancient Greek knowledge, not dry and dusty, but alive, maintained, and softly redolent of the sacred tree of Athens. The calm, oil-scented silence of the library is not an accident of peace. It is a victory in a silent, relentless war. As you stand there, breathing in that curated air, Philin leans close and whispers, "Listen." You strain your ears past the human silence. And there it is, a faint, almost imperceptible background skittering, a microscopic crunching. It is the sound of the enemy. The library's greatest adversaries are not barbarian armies or ignorant mobs. They are far smaller, more patient, and universally present. They are insects, fungi, and the slow, chemical rage of decay. Philin leads you to a storage room behind the main hall. Here, the library's arsenal is kept. The smell is stronger, more medicinal. You see bags of pungent dried herbs, wormwood, with its bitter, sage-like scent, lavender, crushed and floral, cedar shavings, sharp and camphorous. These are stuffed into linen sachets and placed among the shelves, their potent aromas designed to confuse and repel the antennae of moths, beetles, and silverfish who see a papyrus scroll not as Homer's Odyssey, but as a delicious, loud carbohydrate feast. But herbs alone are not enough. Their scent fades. They are a first line of defense. The primary, enduring weapon is the one you've been smelling all along. Philin takes you to a large, sealed storage pit hose, a clay jar as tall as your waist. He removes the lid. Inside is not wine or grain, but a thick, unperfumed olive oil, the cheaper, more robust kind pressed from riper olives. This is the library's bulk strategic reserve. He dips a long-handled ladle and pours some into a shallow basin. The shield, he says. He explains, in pragmatic terms, the biological battlefield. Papyrus, being plant material, is inherently attractive to life. Its fibers can provide food. The animal glue in the seams is a gourmet treat for certain larvae. The starch used in some sizing processes can foster mold. Olive oil, applied correctly, creates a hostile environment for these foes. It is mildly antimicrobial. The thin layer it leaves on the surface of papyrus and on shelving physically blocks moisture, which is the single greatest catalyst for mold growth and the general weakening of fibers. For insects, oil is a barrier and a poison. Many pests breathe through spiracles along their bodies. A surface coated in a fine, oily film can literally suffocate them. Furthermore, the fatty acids in the oil can disrupt the life cycles of eggs and larvae. It's not a perfect, instant kill. it's a gentle, pervasive form of ecological control. This use of oil as a preservative and pest deterrent in storage is a widely accepted historical fact, a common-sense application of a ubiquitous substance. Now, Phelan shows you a lesser-known, slightly grimly amusing detail of this war. He points to a small stack of triangular, fired clay objects in the corner. They look like tiny, hollow pyramids. For the Skolex, he says, the bookworm. These are pest traps. You pick one up. Inside, you see a congealed, sticky residue at the bottom. Phelan explains, the trap is baited with a mixture of honey, grain paste, and a few drops of that prized, fragrant olive oil. The smell acts as an attractant. The insect, lured by the promise of a delicious, oily meal, crawls inside, becomes stuck in the sticky goo, and dies. It's a cruel trick, using the library's own signature scent as a weapon of deceit against its destroyers. You can't help but picture a self-important bookworm, antennae twitching at the sophisticated aroma of fine oil, only to meet a grisly, sugary end. It's a darkly comic footnote in the history of preservation. The war is constant, fought on multiple fronts. Humidity is monitored by the feel of the air and the behavior of the scrolls. If they begin to feel too supple, braziers of low, smoldering charcoal are lit to dry the air, sometimes with aromatic woods added. Direct sunlight, which would bleach and brittle the texts, is meticulously excluded by those milky stone windows. But through it all, the olive oil is the consistent, everyday soldier. It is in the rack the librarian uses, in the treatment of the shelves, in the conditioning of the scroll rods, and even in the devious little death traps. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for oiling scrolls was pest control, moisture regulation, or simply maintaining physical flexibility, but the effect was holistic. It addressed all these threats at once. As you leave the storage room and re-enter the hushed main hall, the scent now feels different. It's no longer just an aroma. It is the smell of a fortress under siege, its walls perpetually anointed with a golden, fragrant resin that whispers to all the tiny, hungry mouths in the dark, this is not food. This is knowledge. Keep out. As the afternoon sun slants through the high selenite windows, its milky light begins to fail. The library does not fall into darkness. Instead, a softer, more intimate illumination takes hold. The bibliophilax and his assistants move silently along the aisles, each carrying a simple, long-handled tool. They are lighting the lamps. This is not just a practical act of banishing shadows. It is the nightly ritual that sustains the library's very atmosphere, in every sense of the word. You are handed a lamplighter, a long, thin rod of bronze with a wick of twisted flax threaded through a clasp at its end. Your task is to help. The lamps themselves are everywhere. Simple, wheel-thrown ceramic lignoi, shallow dishes with a pinched spout for the wick, resting on stone ledges, hanging from bronze chains, or standing on low tables beside reading couches. You approach the first one. It is cold, the blackened wick from last night curled in its spout like a dead insect. You use the bronze rod to lift the wick, then dip it into the lamp's reservoir. It's not full of water, or wine, or anything frivolous. It contains olive oil. The same oil, in fact, that's used in the workshop and on the shelves, though often a lower grade, a bit smokier, pressed from later harvest olives. This is the library's fuel. You fill the lamp from a small, spouted jug. The oil glugs in, pale gold in the dimness. You then use your lit rod, its flame borrowed from a central, eternal brazier kept in a vestibule, to touch the oil-soaked wick. It catches with a soft whump, the flame steadying into a calm, yellow teardrop of light. The smell is immediate and transformative. It is the scent of olive oil burning. Not the acrid, petroleum stink of a modern paraffin candle, but a richer, grainy aroma, with a hint of toasted nuts and warm fruit. It is a smell deeply associated with evening, with study, with the extension of the day's intellectual labor into the realm of night. But as you light lamp after lamp, the bibliophylax quietly explains the lamp's dual purpose. It sees, he murmates, and it cleanses. The light is the obvious function. But the flame itself, burning that particular fuel, is a purifying agent. As the olive oil combusts, it does not burn completely cleanly. It releases a gentle, continuous stream of microscopic smoke particles and vapors. This isn't the thick, choking smoke of a damp log fire. It's a subtle, fragrant fume that rises and disperses into the still library air. And this fumigation is vital. The heat and the chemical byproducts of burning olive oil help to further discourage insects. Moths and beetles avoid the gentle, oily smoke. The slight elevation in temperature near each lamp creates tiny convection currents, preventing dead, damp air from settling in the corners of shelves where mold might take hold. It's a brilliant, integrated system. The very act of illuminating the scrolls for nighttime readers also performs a constant, ambient maintenance on them. The library is literally preserved in light and fragrant smoke. Historians still argue whether this fumigant effect was a happy accident understood intuitively, or a deliberately calculated benefit known to the keepers of great collections like Alexandria or Pergamum. But in practice, it worked. A library was never truly dark or still. Even in the dead of night, a few lamps were often kept burning low, their silent, scented watch keeping the destroyers at bay. You finish your circuit. The library is now a landscape of soft, dancing pools of light. Each lamp creates its own sphere of visual warmth and its own olfactory signature. The collective effect is mesmerizing. The dry papyrus smell, the cedar, the aged oil from the shelves, all of these are now gently warmed and activated by the lamplight, mingling with the toasty scent of burning oil. The air feels alive, gently stirred, and profoundly safe. You take a seat at a reading couch, an unrolled scroll before you. The text is illuminated not by the harsh sun, but by this living, breathing flame. You realize that to read here at night is to participate in the preservation process. Your presence justifies the lamp, and the lamp protects the very text you are reading. The olive oil has journeyed from the orchard, to the workshop, to the shelf, and now, finally, into the flame. Its final act is one of transformation, from liquid fuel, to light for the eyes, to a fragrant, protective vapor for the scroll in your hands. It is the complete cycle of care, burning brightly in a shallow clay dish. The scroll you hold is more than just text on a roll. It is an artifact, a physical object meant to be handled, stored, and protected. And while the papyrus and ink form its soul, its body has other parts, accessories that shield it from the world. Philim leads you away from the reading lamps to a secondary craft station within the library's complex, where the smell of tan leather and sawdust overtakes even the scent of oil for a moment. Here, the final touches are added: the capsa, the cylindrical leather case, and the finishing of the umbilicus, the scroll rod. A leatherworker, his hands stained dark with tannin, is softening a pre-cut rectangle of goat hide in a basin of water. This will be shaped and stitched to create a snug, protective tube for a particularly valuable scroll, perhaps a text by Plato or a prized edition of Homer. The leather itself already has a story. It was tanned using a mixture of oak gall and bark, a process that gave it durability and a rich, brown color. But to make it supple, to keep it from cracking and to help it repel moisture, the tanner had worked fats and oils into its grain. Guess which oil was most readily available and effective? Olive oil, often mixed with animal fats, was a key component of the finishing stuff rubbed into the leather to condition it. The capsa you see being made therefore already carries the scent within its very fibers, a deep, musky version of the library's signature note. But the worker isn't done. Once the case is stitched with strong linen thread, he takes a small jar of a waxy paste. He dips a rag into it and begins to vigorously polish the exterior. Beeswax, he says, catching your eye, and oil. The recipe is simple. Melted beeswax blended with a generous measure of olive oil until it forms a soft, pliable salve. This is the library's equivalent of a weatherproofing balm. He works it into the leather in circular motions, the friction warming the paste, allowing it to seep into every pore. The wax provides a hard, waterproof shell. The oil keeps the leather beneath it flexible and feeds the fibers. As he polishes, the leather transforms from a dull matte to a deep, lustrous shine. The smell that rises is incredible. The honeyed, sweet scent of beeswax married to the grassy fruitiness of the oil, all laid over the primal, earthy smell of the tanned hide. It's a robust, pleasant aroma that promises protection. A scroll housed in this case will be safe from spilled wine, from damp walls, from the casual bruises of travel. And every time the case is opened, that conditioned leather will release a whisper of its waxy, oily perfume. Next, you turn to the umbilicus, the scroll rod. The basic cedar rod you oiled earlier is now receiving its final appointments. A turner is carefully fitting ornamental knobs, cornua, to each end. Some are simple discs of polished bone or ivory. For a wealthy patron's commission, they might be bronze gilded with a hint of gold. But before these knobs are fixed in place with a dab of pine resin glue, the turner does something meticulous. He takes a fine needle and a spool of the thinnest linen thread. He then wraps the last inch of the wooden rod in a tight, cross-hatched binding, creating a textured grip. For the fingers, he explains, so it does not slip from a scholar's hand at a crucial moment. And what does he use to seal and strengthen this delicate linen binding? A drop of olive oil, rubbed in until the thread is slightly translucent and stiff. This ensures the binding doesn't fray and provides just the right amount of friction against the reader's thumb and forefinger as they roll the scroll. It's a tiny detail, but it speaks volumes about the holistic integration of this substance. From the macro scale of shelf treatment to the microscale of a thread on a knob, olive oil was the go-to solution for making things last and work better. You pick up a finished scroll, complete with its capped rod and ready for its leather case. You give the rod an experimental twist. The scroll winds smoothly, the oiled wood and the oil-conditioned inner layer of papyrus working in silent harmony. You bring the rod close to your face. The scent is loud, the sharp, clean cedar, the faint acidity of the bone knob, the dry papyrus, and the foundational note of the oil that has penetrated them all. Historians still argue whether the scented leather cases were primarily status symbols for wealthy owners or a standard preservation tool in institutional libraries, but their practical benefit is undeniable. Together, the oiled rod and the oil-waxed leather case create a microclimate for the scroll, a portable extension of the library's carefully maintained environment. Even outside the sacred halls, the knowledge is swaddled in the signature scent of its birthplace. The smell isn't just in the library. The library, in a very real sense, is in the smell. The head librarian, the man you've been shadowing, is named Ariston. As the day's last light fades completely and the lamplight fully claims the space, his real work begins. This is not the time for public reading or scholarly debate. This is the time for stewardship. You follow him on his evening rounds, a ritual as precise and solemn as a priest tending a temple's inner sanctum. He carries a small, finely woven basket. Inside are his tools, a stack of soft, linen cloths, a pouch of fine, white pumice powder, a whalebone spatula, a haresfoot brush, and 2 small, lidded alabaster jars. You already know what they contain before he opens them. One holds a mixture of beeswax and olive oil. The other holds pure, fragrant olive oil, the same high-grade oil used in the ink. Ariston moves with a slow, meditative pace. He stops at a shelf not to retrieve a scroll for reading, but to commune with it as an object. He selects a scroll at random, his fingers choosing by some internal cataloging system known only to him. He unrolls the first few columns, not reading the text, but reading the material. His eyes are not on the letters, but on the papyrus itself, its color, its surface texture, the state of the seams. He runs the tips of his fingers along the edge, feeling for the telltale dry brittleness or the ominous softness of damp. Tonight, he finds a scroll that concerns him. He shows you, near the outer edge, where it would be most handled. The papyrus has a slight, powdery feel and the color has lightened. "It thirsts," he whispers. From his basket, he takes the jar of pure oil and a fresh linen cloth. He pours a minuscule amount, a pooling no larger than a silver coin, onto the cloth, then folds and rubs the cloth vigorously between his hands. He is not soaking it, he is distributing the oil evenly, warming it, until the cloth is merely impregnated with the scent and the finest molecular layer of the substance. Then, with a touch so light it would not disturb a dust mote, he glides the cloth along the dry edge of the scroll. He does not rub. He caresses. The goal is not to make the papyrus shiny or greasy, but to replenish the natural oils that have evaporated over time, to restore a hint of flexibility. It is hydration at the most delicate level. This practice of lightly oiling scrolls to maintain their pliability is a widely attested duty of ancient librarians, a direct, hands-on preservation technique. But Aristote's ritual is more comprehensive. Next, he addresses the shelf itself. From the other jar, he takes a small dab of the beeswax and oil paste on his fingertip. He applies it to the wooden lip of the nidus from which he took the scroll, working it into the grain with a circular motion. This isn't just for the wood's sake, it's for the scroll that will sit against it. The wax provides a slight barrier, the oil conditions, and together they ensure the shelf doesn't leach moisture from the scroll or provide a rough surface that could cause abrasion. As he works, he explains a lesser-known, slightly amusing aspect of his role. Part of his nightly check involves looking for what he calls the gifts of readers. These are not thoughtful notes, but the accidental deposits left behind: a crumb from a snatched meal, a drop of wine, a smudge of fig jam, even a stray hair oiled with perfumed unguent. These organic intrusions are feasts for pests. The whalebone spatula is for gently scraping away any such debris, and the hare's foot brush, dusted with pumice, is for sweeping the shelf clean afterwards. The pumice, he notes, also helps absorb any excess ambient moisture. His job is as much janitorial as it is scholarly, a reality that would likely surprise the philosophers who imagine their works existing in a realm of pure idea, untouched by the messiness of fig paste. Aristote's final act for this scroll is a quality check of the umbilicus. He rotates the rod, feeling for any splinter or rough patch that might catch and tear the inner layer of papyrus. Finding none, he gives a satisfied nod and returns the scroll to its nest. The entire process for this one scroll has taken several minutes. He will only treat a few each night, rotating through the collection in a cycle that may take years to complete. It is a testament to patience, to a timescale of care that dwarfs human lifespans. Historians still argue whether head librarians like Aristotle were primarily scholars who performed these duties, or professional conservators who also knew the texts, but the evidence points to a hybrid role. He was the guardian of both the meaning and the medium. As you follow him through the silent, lamplit aisles, you understand that the pervasive scent of olive oil in this place is not a passive memory of manufacture. It is an active, daily renewal. It is the smell of Aristote's devotion, rubbed into the fibers of history itself, one gentle, oiled touch at a time. To understand why this scent permeates the very bones of the library, you must step outside its hushed halls, out of the scriptorium, and into the blinding, sun-drenched reality of the Greek economy. The oil you've been smelling isn't just a useful liquid, it is, quite literally, liquid wealth. The olive tree was not merely a plant to the Greeks, it was a gift from the gods, specifically from Athena, who won the patronage of Athens by offering its people the first olive tree. Its product was the foundation of civilization: food, light, medicine, hygiene, and as you now know, the preservation of knowledge. But it was also a hard currency, a strategic resource, and a measure of a city-state's power and stability. Think of the amphorae, those distinctive, pointy-bottomed clay jars you see stacked in the harbors and storerooms. They aren't just pottery, they are the barrels of the ancient Mediterranean world, and a vast proportion of them contained olive oil. The scale of production was staggering. A single modest estate might have hundreds of trees. The oil was graded with the precision of a modern sommelier. The first, cold-press virgin oil from green olives was the finest, used for anointing, for delicate flavors, and yes, for the inks and fine treatments in the scriptorium. Later presses yielded oil for lamps, for cooking, for soap making, and for the bulk preservation work in the library. Nothing was wasted, even the crushed pulp, pumice, was used as fuel or fertilizer. So, when you walk back into the library and breathe in that scent, you are not just smelling a preservative. You are inhaling an extravagant display of wealth. Using high-quality oil to rub on shelves and scrolls is the ancient equivalent of using bottles of vintage champagne to clean the windows of a museum. It signals that the contents within are so valuable that one of the most precious commodities of the age is deployed not for sustenance or trade, but for their mere upkeep. A library that smells strongly of fine oil is a library that is well-funded, a pet project of a wealthy patron or a powerful city, a statement of cultural confidence. It says, "We have so much of this liquid gold that we can afford to let its fragrance soak into our wood and our papyrus." It's a subtler, more pervasive form of bling than gold leaf on a ceiling. This economic reality explains the logistics. The library isn't an isolated hermitage, it's the terminus of a vast economic network. Don't imagine a single, precious arabellos being passed around. Picture instead the delivery, sturdy amphorae of oil, stamped with the seal of an Athenian producer or a Samian merchant, being wheeled into the library's storerooms on a regular schedule. This oil is part of the library's operating budget, as crucial as the papyrus shipments from Egypt or the wages for the scribes. The librarian, Ariston, is not just a curator of texts, he is a manager of precious resources. He would have to account for every cotile of oil used, justifying its application in the scriptorium, in the lamp reservoirs, and on the shelves, to whatever council or wealthy patron funded the institution. It was an investment in permanence. This perspective adds a layer of irony to the war against pests. You are using one of the most sought-after agricultural products in the Mediterranean to fight creatures that would cost nothing to squash. But that's the point. The value isn't in the pest, but in what the pest threatens. The oil protects an asset whose value is incalculable: unique texts, legal codes, philosophical works, the accumulated memory of a culture. The economic logic is sound. It is cheaper to anoint your library in oil than to lose the works of Sophocles to a hungry larvae. Historians still argue whether the use of oil in libraries was driven more by its demonstrable efficacy or by its cultural symbolism as a pure, Athenian commodity, but the two are inextricably linked. Its efficacy made it valuable, and its value made its use a symbol of the value placed on knowledge itself. The scent in the air, therefore, is the smell of a successful economic equation, the conversion of agricultural surplus into cultural immortality. The scent does more than preserve papyrus and signal wealth. It works on the scholar himself. As you settle onto a reading couch in the lamplight, a finished scroll in your hands, you become aware of the atmosphere as an active participant in your study. The library is engineered for focus, and its olfactory profile is a deliberate part of that design. Think of the world outside these walls. The tang of animal sweat from the gymnasium, the smoky reek of blacksmiths' forges, the complex, often foul bouquet of a crowded city street, food waste, human waste, the smell of dust and animals and humanity packed tight. The library is a sensory refuge from all that. The smell of olive oil is, in this context, a smell of cleanliness. Greeks used oil to clean their bodies. They would rub it on and then scrape it off with a strigil, taking dirt and sweat with it. Oil was used to clean and condition wood and leather in the home. Its scent was associated with grooming, with preparation, with order. So, when you breathe in that library air, your mind unconsciously registers it as a clean, prepared space. It is the opposite of chaotic or threatening. It is a scent that lowers the guard, that tells the primal parts of your brain that this is a safe place for the vulnerable act of deep concentration. There's also a psychological weight to it, a dignified gravity. The smell is not light or floral. It's deep, warm, and resonant. It has a physical presence in the air, like the silence itself has a texture. This isn't the scent of a festival or a banquet. It's the scent of serious work. It anchors you in the moment, in the physicality of the scroll, in the importance of the task. It fights the distraction of a wandering mind by gently filling your senses with a consistent, calming, and dignified stimulus. You could think of it as the ancient world's most sophisticated focus spray. The modern concept of ambience is exactly what the librarians and architects of these spaces were crafting, with smell as a primary tool. Now, consider the act of reading itself. You unroll the scroll from its oiled rod. Your fingers touch the papyrus, which carries the faintest memory of its oil treatment, not enough to be slick, but enough to feel slightly different from raw plant fiber. As you read from left to right, you periodically re-roll the finished portion with your left hand and unroll the new portion with your right. This simple, physical interaction is mediated by the conditioned materials. The scroll moves smoothly, predictably. There's no snagging, no crackling protest from dry papyrus. The experience of reading is fluid, uninterrupted. The oil ensures that the technology of the book doesn't get in the way of the text. The mind is allowed to flow along with the narrative or the argument, without the jarring hiccup of a material failure. The scent rising from the scroll as it moves, warmed by your hands and the nearby lamp, is the scent of that seamless flow. Historians still argue whether this sensory environment was a happy byproduct of preservation needs or a consciously designed aspect of elite Greek architecture and atmospheric engineering. But when you look at the descriptions of great libraries, the emphasis is always on their grandeur, their order, their serenity. The smell would have been a cornerstone of that serenity. It was a multisensory guarantee of quality. Just as a modern reader might feel a sense of trust and authority from the crisp pages and sharp print of a well-made book, the ancient scholar felt that same trust through the tactile smoothness of the scroll, the steady light of the olive oil lamp, and the clean, serious fragrance that told him he was in a place where time itself had been asked to slow down and be careful. In here, among the scented shelves, you weren't just reading history. You were sitting in a machine built to defy it, and every breath you took was a reminder of that glorious, futile, beautiful endeavor. The practices of the Greek scriptorium and library did not vanish. They were observed, adopted, and meticulously documented by the cultures that followed. To solidify our understanding, we must play the part of a later scholar, cross-referencing sources. Imagine you are in a Roman tablinum, a study, nearly 4 centuries later. The scroll before you is not Greek philosophy, but a Latin technical manual. The author is someone like Pliny the Elder, that voracious compiler of all known facts, or the architect Vitruvius. You unfurl the scroll, its papyrus now perhaps sourced from different marshes, its ink slightly different, but the knowledge within is a direct inheritance. In Pliny's Natural History, a work as enormous and encyclopedic as the library you just left, you find entries on forestry, on agriculture, and on crafts. And there, nestled among the details on the cultivation of the olive and the uses of its oil, you might find a passing mention of its role in preserving books. He speaks of oils and waxes used to treat writing materials, of the care of archives. It's not a full recipe, but it's a corroboration. He stands as a later witness, confirming that the techniques you witnessed were not a local Athenian quirk, but part of a wider, Mediterranean technology of preservation. For clearer recipes, you might turn to the work of a Roman engineer like Vitruvius. In De Architectura, his tome on building everything from aqueducts to temples, he delves into materials. He discusses the preparation of inks, the construction of libraries, noting they should face east for the gentle morning light, away from the damaging southern humidity, and the treatments for wood and leather. While his focus is architecture, his details on the use of oils and waxes as protectants for organic materials align perfectly with what you saw in the Greek scriptorium. He provides the technical why that the Greek craftsman understood instinctively. Oil repels water, conditions fibers, and deters pests. His text acts as a bridge, carrying the Greek savoir-faire into the Roman world, standardizing it. But perhaps the most vivid confirmation comes from an unexpected, drier source: Egypt under Roman rule. Here, in the desert towns like Oxyrhynchus, thousands of papyrus fragments have been recovered from rubbish heaps, preserved not by careful library maintenance but by the desiccating sand. Among these fragments are not just lost plays of Sophocles, but everyday documents, tax receipts, personal letters, and, crucially, craftsmen's handbooks. Some of these Greek-language texts from Roman Egypt contain explicit instructions for scribes and librarians. They give recipes for ink that include a drop of pure oil to prevent bleeding. They advise on the treatment of scroll rods with oil of good quality to ensure smooth rolling. One fascinating fragment even discusses the maintenance of library shelves, recommending a monthly wipe down with a linen cloth lightly moistened with oil, to keep the wood sound and to discourage the crawling pests. It's a mundane, bureaucratic piece of paper that shouts across the centuries, yes, this was standard procedure. This cross-referencing does something important. It moves the scent from being a poetic notion, wouldn't it have smelled nice in there, to a documented, technical reality of ancient information science. The Greek library's smell wasn't an accident of architecture. It was the result of applied, recipe-driven knowledge that was copied, transmitted, and improved upon across empires. Historians still argue over the precise transmission lines of this technical knowledge. How much was written, how much was oral tradition passed from master to apprentice? But the material evidence and the later texts point to a consistent, widespread practice. So, as you sit in your imagined Roman study, the Greek scroll from Athens before you and the Roman technical manual beside it, the story comes full circle. The practices you witnessed were not lost. They were studied, written down, and integrated into the administrative machinery of an even larger empire. The scent of olive oil in a library became a transnational standard, a hallmark of a properly maintained archive from the Aegean to the Nile to the Tiber. The smell was, in a very real sense, the smell of imperial best practice for knowledge management. It was the olfactory signature of a civilization trying to save itself from oblivion, one oiled scroll at a time. All the threads of craft, economy, and sensory design lead to one legendary place, the Great Library of Alexandria. It is the apex, the grand unification theory of everything you've witnessed in the smaller Greek scriptorium and library. Now, you are no longer in a quiet Athenian hall, but in the bustling, cosmopolitan heart of the Ptolemaic kingdom. The scale is the first shock. Forget a single room with niches. Imagine a vast complex, a Mausian, shrine to the Muses, that is part university, part research institute, and part warehouse of the world's memory. The air here is not just still, it is deep, layered with the accumulated exhalations of perhaps 500,000 scrolls. The scent of olive oil in Alexandria is not a note in the air, it is the air itself, rendered profound. Walk through the colonnaded halls. The papyrus scent is oceanic, a dry, sweet tide. The cedar from countless shelves and rods forms a sharp, clean ceiling to that smell. But underpinning it, giving it weight and cohesion, is the omnipresent fragrance of oil. Here, the logistics you imagined earlier are operating at a staggering, state-sponsored level. The library wasn't just a cultural project, it was an arm of the Ptolemaic state, funded by the vast grain and trade wealth of Egypt. Its acquisition budget was legendary. They were known to confiscate any scrolls found on ships docking in Alexandria's harbor, copying them and sometimes keeping the originals. But its preservation budget must have been equally colossal. Think of the oil required. Not just for the scriptorium, where an army of scribes toiled to copy every acquired text, using the same oil-mediated processes you learned. Not just for the lamps that must have burned in their hundreds to illuminate the long corridors and reading rooms day and night, but for the maintenance. An army of librarians, far more numerous than Ariston and his few assistants, would have been on a perpetual, rotating cycle of care. They would have moved through the shelves like gardeners tending an immortal orchard, their baskets full of linen cloths and alabaster jars, anointing the scrolls of Aeschylus, the histories of Babylon, the medical texts of India. The smell of the oil here would have been constantly refreshed, a living layer in the atmosphere. It was the smell of the most ambitious project in human history, to collect and preserve all knowledge. The lesser-known detail about Alexandria is that its fame likely created a feedback loop with the very practices we've explored. As the library became the model, the standard against which all others were judged, its methods became the ones to emulate. The Alexandrian method for cataloging and preservation would have been studied and copied by smaller libraries across the Greek and later Roman world. This includes, almost certainly, its regimen of maintenance using olive oil. So, the scent wasn't just a byproduct of the library's operation, it became part of its legend, a sensory marker of what a real, world-class library was supposed to be like. To visit Alexandria and breathe that air was to understand, on a visceral level, what it meant to take knowledge seriously. But the scale also introduces a somber irony. That much papyrus, that much organic material, concentrated in one place, was a monumental fire hazard. The oils and waxes used to preserve the scrolls were, of course, highly flammable. The very substances that protected the texts from the slow, gnawing threats of insect and rot made them catastrophically vulnerable to the fast, all-consuming threat of flame. Historians still argue fiercely about the details of the library's various declines and destructions, whether it was Julius Caesar's accidental fire, Christian riots, or later Muslim conquest, but the tragic irony remains. The library was preserved in oil, and oil can feed a fire. The scent that represented its immortality was also a whisper of its potential oblivion. In Alexandria, the smell of olive oil would have carried that unconscious duality, the clean, calm scent of eternal order, laid over the ghost of a possible, terrifying holocaust. It was the fragrance of human ambition at its most brilliant and its most fragile. Nothing lasts forever, especially not a technological ecosystem as delicate as the papyrus and oil library. The world changed, and with it, the smell of knowledge changed too. You witnessed the first major shift not in a library, but in a different kind of workshop. Here, the smell is not of crushed reeds and olive oil, but of a sharper, more acrid aroma, the smell of soaked lime, of ash, of animal flesh under tension. This is a parchment maker's yard. Parchment, or membrana, made from the carefully prepared skins of calves, sheep, or goats, was not new. The wealthy library of Pergamum had famously championed it, some say due to a papyrus embargo from Egypt. But over centuries, it began to supplant papyrus as the writing material of choice, especially for important, lasting works. The process of making parchment is brutal alchemy. The skin is soaked in a lime solution to remove hair and fat, then stretched incredibly tight on a frame and scraped thin. It is a material born of tension and abrasion. And while it, too, could be treated with oils to make it more supple, a practice that continued, its fundamental relationship with preservatives was different. Parchment is inherently more durable than papyrus. It is less appetizing to insects, more resistant to moisture, and far tougher. It didn't need the constant, gentle anointing in the same way. The primary scent of a parchment codex, the book form that began to replace the scroll, was the leathery, slightly smoky smell of the cured skin itself, sometimes overlaid with the tannic scent of inks made with iron gall, a new, powerful, and corrosive ink that would have horrified your old Greek ink master Philon. The second, deeper shift was cultural and spiritual. As the Roman Empire Christianized, the focus of book production moved increasingly into the scriptoriums of monasteries, perched on windy cliffs in Ireland or nestled in European forests. The economics were utterly different. Olive trees don't grow in the misty north. Olive oil became an expensive import, a luxury for the altar lamp and the kitchen of the abbot, not for the wholesale treatment of vellum pages. The monastic scribes developed their own preservative ecology. They used local materials, beeswax from their own hives, walnut oil, linseed oil. The smell in a medieval scriptorium was oathier, waxier, with the dense, mineral smell of iron gall ink and the cold stone of the cloister. The clean, fruity, Mediterranean scent of the Athenian library was a memory, a ghost in texts that spoke of a warmer, vanished world. Yet, the ghost persisted. Scribes copying Greek and Roman texts, even onto vellum with northern inks, would sometimes encounter the old instructions in the technical manuals you consulted earlier. The notes about a drop of oil in the ink, about polishing with an oiled cloth. They might have tried it with their local oils, with mixed results. The idea of oil as a preservative for knowledge never died. It just adapted to new materials and new geographies. But the specific olfactory signature, the marriage of sun-baked papyrus, fine cedar, and the peppery kiss of first-press Athenian olive oil, that specific combination was broken. The library as a sensory experience was redefined. It became colder, more mineral, more waxen. Historians still argue whether the shift from papyrus to parchment was the primary cause of the sense change, or whether the economic collapse of the unified Mediterranean trade networks, which made bulk olive oil shipments to distant libraries impractical, was the true culprit. It was likely both, two waves of the same tide. The world fragmented, and with it fragmented the unified technology of preservation. The great scent of the ancient library, that symbol of a coherent, pan-Mediterranean culture of learning, faded like a perfume from an empty jar. What remained was the memory, carried in the texts themselves, of a time when knowledge didn't just sit on a shelf, but was kept alive in an atmosphere of warm, golden, fragrant care. So where does the scent go when its world vanishes? It retreats into the realm of nostalgia, a ghost in the textual memory. 4 centuries afterwards, scholars reading the classical authors in their cold, stone-walled libraries or candlelit cells would occasionally stumble upon a passing reference, a fragment of description. A poet might mention the fragrant halls of the Muses. A satirist might joke about a philosopher who smelled more of lamp oil than logic. A technical manual, copied and recopied on parchment, would preserve the instruction to apply a fine oil to a writing surface. These were the scent prints, the olfactory fossils. To a Renaissance humanist, unearthing and obsessing over every detail of the ancient world, these hints became tantalizing clues. They could read Vitruvius on architecture and Pliny on natural history, and they could begin to reconstruct the sensory experience of the ancient library in their minds. When they built their own grand libraries, like the Laurentian in Florence or the Bodleian in Oxford, they emulated the classical architecture, the colonnades, the niches, the grand reading halls. They filled them with parchment and, later, paper books. But they couldn't recreate the smell. Their libraries smelled of the new, of paper, of leather bindings treated with different chemicals, of wood polish, of the soot from coal fires and the tallow from candles. The ancient scent was a lost chord, a note that their modern instruments could not sound. It became a thing of poetry and longing, a sensory metaphor for the lost wholeness and clarity of the classical age. Yet, the ghost never fully departed. The fundamental principle, that the caretakers of knowledge must actively fight entropy with the tools they have, endured. The monastic scribe with his beeswax, the Victorian librarian with his camphor balls and strict humidity controls, the modern archivist in her climate-controlled vault with inert gas, all are heirs to Ariston and his alabaster jar of oil. The methods have grown more sophisticated, less fragrant, but the mission is the same, to hold back the inevitable dark. The smell of olive oil was the signature of that fight in one specific time and place, using the best technology available. Today, in our digital age, the fight has become utterly odorless. Data is preserved in silent server farms, in magnetic charges and silicon states, defended by firewalls and backup protocols. There is no scent of preservation anymore, only the faint hum of electricity and the dry, static smell of filtered air. It is efficient, miraculous, and utterly disembodied. And perhaps that is why the idea of the ancient library's smell captivates us so deeply now. In an age where knowledge is increasingly intangible, a cloud of information we can't touch or smell, the thought of a place where wisdom had a physical presence, a weight, a texture, and a distinct, memorable aroma is powerfully romantic. It roots thought in the body, in the earth, in the grove of olive trees and the reeds of the Nile. It reminds us that ideas, for most of human history, were not abstract. They were things you made with your hands, repaired with your hands, and preserved with the fruit of a sacred tree. The scent is a bridge back to that tangible reality. Historians still argue, of course, about the precise emotional or psychological impact this scent would have had on the ancient scholar. Was it a background note, unnoticed as we ignore the smell of our own homes? Or was it a conscious component of the library's awe? We'll never know for certain. But the very fact that we are here, centuries later, piecing together the clues, from ink recipes, from woodworking manuals, from the economics of amphory, trying to resurrect a lost smell in our mind's nose, is a testament to its power. It proves that the library's mission succeeded in the most profound way. The knowledge was preserved. And part of that knowledge, it turns out, was the memory of its own unique perfume, the smell of a civilization so in love with its thoughts that it anointed them in gold pressed from olives, and sent their fragrance, and their meaning, drifting down the long, silent corridors of time, all the way to you, listening in the dark. The scroll of our journey is fully wound now, the final rod capped, the last shelf gently anointed. The vivid, sun-drenched images of the scriptorium, the silent, lamplit halls of the library, the bustling ports heavy with amphory, they begin to soften at the edges, like ink gently bleeding into damp papyrus, losing their sharp definition but not their essence. The frantic scratch of the reed pen, the deep thump of the stone roller, the whispered consultations of scholars, these sounds recede, replaced by the quiet, rhythmic sound of your own breath, steady and calm in the darkness of your room. The scents, too, begin to blend and fade, the sharp olive, the dry papyrus, the smoky lamp, merging into a single, warm, golden memory of care and attention. It is a comforting thought, isn't it? That for all the chaos and fragility of the ancient world, there were still quiet places where immense effort was devoted not to conquest or glory, but simply to remembering, to smoothing the path for a thought to travel from one mind to another across the abyss of centuries. That effort had a smell, a texture, a tangible presence. And while we can't truly breathe that same air, we can understand its composition, a blend of craft, economics, and a deep, abiding reverence for the fragile word. So let that understanding settle over you now, not as a fact to recall, but as a feeling to hold. A feeling of safety, of continuity, of knowledge being tended like a sacred, everlasting flame in a simple clay lamp, fueled by the fruit of a tree, burning steadily against the vast and patient night. Let your mind be that still, well-ordered library for a moment, all its volumes safe, its atmosphere calm and perpetual. And as you drift towards sleep, know that the stories are preserved, the arguments are recorded, the poems are sung, and they are all, in their own way, resting peacefully, wrapped in the gentle, fragrant dark.